Based on extant old violin bridges and around 800 iconographic sources, the origin of the various elements of bridges found on modern instruments of the violin family can be revealed, and the different stages of their evolution can be reconstructed, thus offering inspiration and concrete historical evidence to instrument makers, researchers, and musicians. The elements of the modern violin bridge were already present in bowed instrument bridges of the 16th century. 3 sections can be discerned. The first one, the lower arch, evolved into the crotch. On depictions of early instruments, the arch corresponding to the crotch of the present-day violin bridge was generally relatively high, even for smaller instruments. So the architectural context was not accidental, and accordingly, the terminology used for arch types in medieval buildings can be applied. There is one exception, though. The Dutch or Flemish word kam is still used in that language to denote this spare part, as in 15th century Flemish paintings it resembles a comb with a vertical post of equal height for each string. Before 1600 the trefoil, which will be at the origin of the bridge's heart, was an important variant on the simple rounded or pointed high arches. The arch of the bridge will often resemble the pattern at the end of the fingerboard, shaped as a trefoil, a semicircle, an ogee, or an accolade, thus stressing the relation between bridge and fingerboard. The practice disappeared after the middle of the 17th century, together with other features of the archaic violins, only to live on in some violas d'amore with bridge-like patterns at the end of their fingerboard, nearest to the bridge. Gradually the high arch's height was reduced, especially for smaller-sized instruments, in most cases by depressing them. So the ogee evolved into a flat ogee, also called accolade. Downward pointed and round arches became flatter, and eventually the crotch became almost straight. This evolution into the typical Baroque violin bridge is shown in the Stradivari drawings, which indeed have an accolade-shaped crotch or a downwards pointing arch. The straight arch, without a point, is the only type to survive in the modern violin bridge's crotch. In the 17th century, the hearth evolved as a remnant of the middle arch of the trefoil. The latter first became narrower when the 2 lower ends came closer, and then was detached from the arch as part of a design in which the arch was depressed and new space was available to be filled in the waist of the bridge. This hole often stood very low, close to the lower arch. Some smaller holes found in early bridges might have served to attach a string that ran back to the tailpiece. Between 1650 and 1800, the perforation of the middle surface shows a variety of shapes and combinations: 1 circle, 1 or more hearts, often combined with 1 or more circles, or droplet-shaped holes. Some bridges were completely or partially blackened. And then during the second half of the 18th century the heart, if present, lost its outer, lower point, and the inner point is moustache-shaped or even cut off straight, giving rise to the shape found on the modern violin bridge. A broad C-curve seems to be the basic shape for the sides of the bridge, but most bridge sides of the 15th and 16th centuries are S-shaped. Usually a circle segment turns inwards near the top and passes in a broadening curve downwards, before turning the opposite way towards the bottom. This design served as a basis for 17th and 18th century violin bridges, which in turn evolved into the modern bridge. Around 1600, 2 new elements changed the initial S pattern. Firstly, the circle segment on the sides was moved towards the middle and also lower down, away from the bridge top. A straight line was introduced to connect the shifted circle with the side lines, and so the forerunner of the kidney wing was created. Secondly, the angle between the upper and lower parts of the side became more explicit, giving birth to the forerunner of the greave and the bee-sting. This angle was even more stressed by an inward bend below, nowadays called the shin. The knee appeared when the hip was bent down and outwards. During the 17th and 18th centuries, and especially after 1750, the proportions of the side of the bridge gradually changed, the upper part becoming taller and the gap between the upper and lower parts becoming smaller. The curve changed into a straight horizontal line. Underneath it is a narrow bend, the knee, ending in a bee-sting above the greave, which now lives on as a small tongue-shaped protuberance. The kidney shape arose by depressing the circular side hole into an elliptic shape. Gradually the bridge's width altered to become smaller at the feet and larger at the top. Toes were generally not in vogue before the 18th century. Mostly they are only present on the outside, as some kind of continuation of the lower part of the shin. On the inside, they started appearing during the 18th century as some kind of reminder of the lower end of the horseshoe arch. Violin bridges of the 19th century often reflect the typical tendencies towards experiment, historicity, and nationalism of the era, but generally these are not relevant as far as the evolution from earlier shapes to the modern bridge is concerned.